Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Ambyes, and today we're going to do a 2025 Inspiration Art Vision Board. So, if you're interested in going from the left side of this window to the right side and paring down possibly your large boards of inspiration from Pinterest or saved bookmarks on social media sites, feel free to follow along. I'll be using the app PureEref. I'll link it in the description. It is for computers. But you can use another one called VIZREF, which I'll also link, and it is available, I believe, on iPad and desktop, so whichever one, they'll both work. It's basically just a way for us to have all of our images in one place. I'll walk you through what I'm doing currently, which is moving those inspiration pieces to the other PureRef board, basically creating a mood board. But I've already selected several pieces that I found on Twitter or that I already had saved and put the user's credit beside their URL or their username, so that I'll have easy access to it while I create this more pared down, focused mood board on the left. I want to go ahead and apologize if you hear any noises in the background. I don't think you will, but if you do, there are some cattle actually behind my house that had a rough night because we had storms, and they are still a little upset about it. So hopefully you won't hear those noises, but if you do, forgive them. We've had tornadoes all night. So moving on, 2025 Vision Mood Board. The way that I'm setting mine up is I pulled inspirations from my bookmarks, from Pinterest, from social media that for some reason I felt drawn to. And initially, whenever I found these images, and I'm going to actually go ahead and place that up on the screen for you to see, I had artists that I enjoyed, and so I actually went through kind of like the archive or the Pinterest boards that I had of them and pulled the artworks of theirs that really spoke to me. So not every bit of their style is represented here, but the parts of their style that I really enjoyed are. And so when you're making this mood board, if one of their compositions doesn't speak to you, obviously don't include it. Don't feel like because you are saying you want to do something more like that artist that you need to include everything. At first, I tried to do that, and then I realized not every piece has that it component that I really enjoy or want to add into my work. Because obviously, as an artist, you have your own style. And so just because something from their style calls to you, don't feel like you have to put everything of theirs in. So what I have is a very curated set of bookmarks and inspirations that I'm working from. Initially, my thoughts were I wanted to kind of go in order of each artist, and I stick to that mostly. So the way that I had organized my boards was by artist on the right side, and each of the darker, like black canvas areas is a specific artist, and their artworks are inside that with their credit link. I made a rule for myself because I am really trying to focus on kind of like really cinching in my style and getting more of a direction. And so I told myself I could only pick 2 works from each canvas, and if I could, only one. And that was a really hard rule because starting out, I went for Mancuso. I'm not really sure. They said that they don't have a pronunciation for their name, that it's just random letters, but that's kind of how I say it in my head. Basically, they had 2 compositions that I absolutely adore and that really inspire me. I just think they're amazing compositions. And so I fought with myself picking between them, and then just decided I'm going to put both down and we'll see what happens. I then moved on to the second artist, which is Clemsonian, which I think is like the coolest name. And I picked their artwork for the texture. I really love the texture in the clothing fabric. It's really similar to why I picked Mancuso's on the right side with the 2 girls. Really love the fabrics. Really love that you could see the brushwork. Personally, I went ahead and slowly kind of tried to make it look aesthetically pleasing on the left side, and you'll actually see as the video moves forward that I almost make a mini composition on the left side, which it's not the final composition, and I do kind of rearrange things at the end, because what you'll see as you go through building these vision boards and finding the artworks that really speak to you, or at least what I found was some of them, after seeing them all together, I could really see a trend of why I like them. Maybe the composition was similar, maybe the colors were similar. But when I looked at them in their groupings, I realized even though some things were really nice and I really enjoyed them, like color comps, I would not want to use that color comp in my artwork. And so while I might like the composition, I might not like the colors. And that really helped me narrow down even further what I liked about the style. Originally, before I even got to this part, I tried to do this in text format. And so I'll bring up that original image from where I kind of did see some background work on this before I ever filmed this video. What I found was that I was really drawn to balanced portraits or illustrations that had a really specific point where your eye was drawn. I knew that I really liked creamy textures, but not a lot of texture. I really wanted it to be smooth, and so that's where the word creamy comes in, because I didn't really know how to describe that in any other way. I also found that I really liked bold colors, and it felt like the use of shadow and light overall really called to me, but I also saw that I liked there to be a lot of breathing room in the portraits and the illustrations. It was mostly people with large areas around them. And then I like dark and serene portraits that felt like something was just about to happen. However, this helped me understand that when I saw everything together, while I did enjoy bold portraits that had color, like what you're seeing on the left, the far left, and then the bright couple photo, is that overall, I actually like a much more muted palette, but I was really drawn to the textures and the colors of those brighter portraits, so I ended up breaking them into their own category near the end of the video. So let's talk about what you can do. What you should do first is you should find your inspirations online. You should either save those images or make a Pinterest board where you can drag and drop, or create some sort of canvas like I've done where you paste those images in, and if you have Adobe Photoshop, that would be easy to do as well. After you have that grouping of images where you've pulled in your inspirations, then you should break that down. For me, I broke it down by artist, so if you didn't do that initially, group those artworks based on who did them. So group them by artist, and then the next step is going to be pick one or two artworks out of that artist grouping that speak to you the most. Either that's your favorite that they've done, or that's the one that you feel like you most wish that you could do. For me, that's how I picked. I picked what is the one image that if I made it, I would feel that I was achieving like my goal. And so for me, I have a lot of texture goals in my paintings, a lot of compositional goals, and just a lot of color goals. And so that was how I picked mine. You may have a very specific thing, such as lighting, that you're looking for, and that's fine. Whatever it is that you feel like is the ultimate goal for your future artworks, because this is your vision board. It's what you're going to look at for inspiration whenever you're stuck or you're not sure what to practice or what to do next. Make sure you're picking things that are going to inspire you, but also that are your goals for this next year. What are you going to want to achieve, and which artworks represent that for you? For example, for Tenzing Marasink, like, I adore everything that they have done. Every one of their artworks is just fantastic. I love the texture, I love the colors, I love the tones. However, only one of those spoke to my goals and what I want out of this next year, and that was the color comp and the values on this piece here, which I believe he kind of titled something similar to Sun Night. And he actually, interestingly enough, when I looked, this was his first pass of that drawing, and it actually turned out completely different whenever he finalized it. And so it's a totally different color comp, it's a totally different direction. He actually flipped the canvas and went like a very different way with it. And I think that's awesome to see like how much it changed for him. And for me, his final composition did not speak to what I wanted in the future. So for me, it was great that he showed us his process, because it allowed me to see something that I felt was very inspiring. So I threw that one over there. I have this one photo, which you can see right now I'm clicking on, that for some reason the source did not save with it, which strangely enough, PureRef is supposed to save the sources whenever you paste in an image so that you can always just click open and it will be there. However, I found that unfortunately that never worked with any image that I pasted, except for whenever I very first pasted them in. But then any other time afterwards, if I clicked on something else or closed the program, it never worked. So I had to go do a little bit of research and find that again, and that was easy enough. I found the link, included it, because I want to make sure, since I'm showing this online, that all the artists are credited appropriately. If you're doing this just for yourself, for personal use, and no one's gonna see it, then it's probably not a big deal if you save the copyright, not the copyright, the names, the credit. But I would advise it, because if for some reason you're wanting to look more deeply into a piece they've done, or maybe just see if they have any other pieces like that, it becomes very hard to remember whose artwork this is if you're pulling from multiple places like Pinterest and not maybe like a social media following where you really know the artist that you're selecting from. So, step 2, you look over at the left side. I'm organizing, I'm aligning it based on what's most similar. So, this isn't really a necessary step. You can place them in your canvas however you like. I placed them as well as I could as I went, with similar styles. So, similar colors, similar composition, or similar portrait or landscape orientations, whatever it is that you feel is best. I also cropped as I went, as you can see here. I just wanted kind of that color comp, because what spoke to me was the colors, and I didn't really want the swatches, and so I went ahead and cropped it down. So don't feel like you can't do that. These have also been a lot of real-time videos that I've been showing. This actually took about an hour and 30 minutes, which I took my time. I wasn't like rushing. And this part has been sped up quite a bit, about 300%, just so that you guys wouldn't have to watch me struggle through getting everything organized. Once I did get it organized, I then went into what I call step 3, which is breaking it into categories. What really matches, what has similar vibes, tones. When I started looking at them in such small segments, I've taken them out of that large canvas on the right side, and now that I'm viewing them in a more curated fashion, I'm really starting to realize that certain things seem to match better than others. For example, I realized that the two women better matched the two female portraits that are from the same show, but they have similar colors, whereas the top 4 images were much more similar in color. So I rearranged those. The ones on the bottom I kept together because they were really similar in color palette as well. They were red and blue, and so I started organizing based on that. So if there's a step 3 to this process, I think it is if you start seeing similarities or groupings outside of what you initially felt, pay attention to those. Step 4, if you realize that your canvas is a mess, feel free to organize it in the middle of a project. I noticed that mine was really messy and hard to see, and I wanted it to be easier for you guys to see. Because if things aren't reading well visually on the screen, it can be really hard to follow. And I know what you guys are seeing is really just me moving images around, and I hope the audio will help you understand the process, but really all it was me really deciding, okay, is this something I want to see in my artwork? Is this something that I wish that I did more of? And it was really hard for me to select sometimes. Like these images, for example, I loved the texture, I loved the composition, I really enjoyed how they were framed, but they didn't really match what I felt like was my end result or what I wanted to finish my artworks with, which would be the top four, where they have like this very nicely balanced image that's almost in like a 3:4 format, which obviously those were screenshots from a movie, but just like the two portraits beside those screen cap redraws, there's something about them that just isn't what I want in my finished work. That isn't how I would want the illustration to look complete. But the colors are gorgeous. And so I wanted them to still be on this inspiration board, even though I knew that wasn't what I wanted the final illustration to look like. And I think what I found was that the top images became what I'd want to see in a final composition, a final illustration. If I was really going to bring everything together, those are examples of what I feel like that would look like. Then I had what I felt like was the colors, or maybe the lighting that I really liked. And if I took away the colors, I think that the values would be similar to those on top. And then eventually I split it into also like a inspirational board, because there's some that I really, really liked. Like right here, for example, I was looking at Rage and Ruin, and I love them. I mean, I love every one of them, but that is not my style. And so I wanted to keep them on the board somewhere because I really wanted to look back and be like, those are so inspiring. Why are they so inspiring? Or maybe to get inspiration from their composition or their colors or how they created a new idea from existing media. I just think it's really interesting how all artists can be so different and have such different interpretations, and I think that's where a vision artboard comes in handy. I also think it helps you really pinpoint what you think your style is. For me, I've always thought my style would be something really heavily saturated, but I'm finding that I'm actually really drawn towards things that are heavily contrasted in value, and so maybe I thought saturation was doing that. But, I still have a lot of learning to do as well, and that's really where this vision board is going to go into kind of the final step of utilizing it, which is once it's finished, it should really be referenced. And if you're finding that you're ignoring certain images on the vision board, the mood board, then perhaps those should be deleted so that they're not kind of getting in your mind and making you do things that maybe you wouldn't normally do in a composition. So I really think it's like a work in progress completely. Things are going to lose their interest for you, and then other artists and other people are going to gain interest in your eyes or inspire you, and so it'll be something that's very much moving and changing as you evolve the next year. The next thing that I did was delete out artworks that I just felt didn't fit what I had really come to select as like my inspiration. So for my vision of the next year, I realized that certain artworks were not going to fit in with that vision, and so I got rid of them and I pared them down. And so I ended up with a very curated board with much less images than I initially thought. I also ran into the strange feeling of not using any images. So, for example, this person that I'm looking at right now, even though I was super inspired by them and I felt like they had some of the most awesome brush strokes that I've ever seen. There wasn't really a place for them on the mood board. Yeah, they had great paint and release strokes. Yes, I found them very inspiring. Absolutely, I'm going to follow them forever. But in terms of finding a place for them on a board that I would be referencing often, I just didn't really find it. Their compositions weren't what I'd like for my final illustration. The colors were different than what I was looking for in my illustrations, and their values were different. And I think that you can find yourself in that situation as you're sifting through your inspiration photos. Sometimes they're just inspiring because they're inspiring. There's nothing that you can pull from them to put into your artwork. And so I ended up moving on from them, but it did trigger in my mind a second look at the left side of the board, and I began really trying to organize it in a composition that made sense. At this point, I was still a little unsure on where certain things should go. Like the one that I'm dragging right now, that skin tone is amazing, incredible, so well done. But I was finding that saturation-wise and value-wise, it wasn't really fitting into what I was seeking in a final illustration. But I didn't want to get rid of it because I felt like it was something I'd want to reference for when I was trying to create skin tones myself, especially their use of just light and shadow. And so I went ahead and left it there because I felt like I would find a place for it. But that led me to moving around the entire left side of the canvas, because once I removed that one, I found that it no longer looked as good together. And so I started trying to create my own little artwork on the left side. So at this point, I realized I almost messed up. I had not saved at all during this entire process, which almost led to me losing a lot of work. So thank goodness I remembered. I then found an artwork on my Pinterest. I went ahead and went back to my Pinterest, made sure I wasn't missing anything, because I felt like I was at the final stage. I felt like I had everything that I needed. But I knew that I had saved some artworks the night before on my phone. And the problem was I didn't know if they were AI or not. So like step 700, trying to figure out, are these AI generated? And I felt like it wasn't AI generated because the hands were so well done. But upon a Google search, I couldn't find anything. And when I Googled the name, Fingway? Yeah, I think. And I didn't come up with anything, and Google Tonight didn't come up with anything. Well, at the last little bit, I realized that there was a copyright, like watermark at the bottom. And I thought, well, maybe that's a social media site, because I know that some like Chinese websites will watermark images. And so when I highlighted it, Google gave me a translate. And I was like, okay. So the first thing that popped up was this. And I was like, that looks so similar. So long story short, I was super excited. I found it. It wasn't AI generated, which was even better, because that meant this is someone's, actual artwork. This is something I can do. Now, this led me into a short intermission where I went and looked through all their stuff just to see if there was anything else that was inspiring to me. I did find one other piece. It was the Melania rock goddess, and I added that, and it was kind of funny because neither of the pieces were necessarily coordinated to what I was finding I felt like my style was, or what I really wanted to move towards, but their use of brushwork was so good that I just went ahead and included it anyway. It was one of those where even if it didn't match the final result, I felt like I wanted it there as a reference for brushwork, and I wasn't willing to not include it. So if you come across an artwork that doesn't necessarily work for you, but you feel like there's something in it, like a brushwork pattern or details that you feel like need to be included, I mean, sometimes you have to break the rules. So I broke my rule of, I wasn't going to include anything that wasn't going to be in the final illustration, and I just felt like it was too inspiring to not include it. So I did go ahead and add it. And then I just tried to find somewhere that it looked like it kind of matched, and I never did really figure that out until the end, and it kind of gave me just like fits because then I went and redid the whole canvas again. So if you're like me and you struggle to make your canvas look the way you want it to, I get it. I hear you. I feel that, and good luck because it's a pain in the butt. But weirdly enough, part of that process really helped me narrow down the groupings again. I feel like everything in an artist process just really serves a purpose. Like, it felt like I was floundering and just like being really finicky, but doing this helped me see the images in a different way, like resizing them, shrinking them, moving them around in the composition. It really gave me a different perspective on each of the images, and by resizing different ones, and at first I had some that were much larger than the others, and then eventually I shrank them, and I think giving some sort of hierarchy to size can be helpful because I knew most importantly that I really felt like the final composition in the top right image with the lady laying in like the snow had an overall amazing composition. But initially, I actually had the two men on the left that were embraced as the larger composition because I just really liked how balanced it was. And so, as I went, I found that I had certain preferences that I didn't realize until I was looking at things on such a tiny scale. And I do think that's the benefit of PureRef is things you can really scale things down, but because those images are saved in the like embedded in the file, they never actually lose their quality. So you can zoom in or zoom out as much as you want. We're kind of coming to a close here. I basically just finished up this canvas by organizing things into groups, determining what I felt like needed to be in each category, and aligning the text so that it would be with each image. Now, you could have just kept it the way that it was before or not at all, depending on where you're going to be posting this. I felt like because I'd moved things around so much and some of them were not in straight lines, I just wanted to go ahead and put the URLs right beside the artworks. That way I would know exactly who, made this artwork and I would not feel bad about showing it online. After I had organized the credits and arranged them, I started grouping them, which for PureRef is just Command G, and it will group things into like their own tiny canvas, and then they'll be locked, and so you don't have to worry about when you're zooming in that they will mess things up. At this point, I decided I needed to categorize what the different little sections were, and so this was my overall. That specific canvas was what I felt like I wanted my final compositions to look like. For me, it was the muted colors, the high value contrast, and then the next set that I'm working on now, I felt like I really enjoyed the lighting. So this specific canvas, even though there's only 3 images, I felt like they were all important enough and central to what I really want my artwork to have this next year, that they should be in their own category and not deleted. And so I went ahead and made them their own canvas as well. The next set of images that I selected were really difficult for me because there was something about them that really spoke to me, but that I didn't really know how to categorize. And so I kind of rearranged them slightly, and I decided that there were 4 images that really went together, and I realized that I liked them for their complementary tones, and the fact that they were very well lit, and they kind of had like a nice value of light to dark in them. And so, it's kind of weird because the top 2 do have a lot of contrast, like dark values, whereas the bottom 2 portraits don't actually have that much contrasted value, but they still have similar lighting, so I went ahead and grouped them as like lighting inspiration. I then created another canvas, and I knew that I wanted those two images, but there was nowhere that I could really put them, because the reason they were there was I felt like the colors were gorgeous, and I was really inspired by their selections. And so I decided, let's make a category based on ones that I felt like were gorgeous, but I don't know that I have like a reason for them. So here's how this broke down in my mind. Top left is Mary Metzger, and I thought her color comp was incredible, and I want to begin doing color comps instead of just going straight in like a crazy person. Next is Zara Hardest, and their color, their skin color abilities are incredible. I mean, they're just so creamy and beautiful and saturated, but also they have such good shadows. And while their artwork is lacking texture that I want, so I didn't include them in the overall illustration, I felt like I needed them around because I want to look at that and be like, that's what you should be aiming for in terms of skin color. The next is a very long, no, that's SGKG. Love their composition, just the softness of the colors and the way that Mads Mikkelsen's face looks against those greens. Next, I loved the book cover style illustration. For me, I just felt like it was so successful, and that's something I really want to get into, is cover illustration. Cravat is the next one, and I adore the just softness and the almost like chalky painterly texture of that illustration, and also just the composition. Again, I chose Winter of Her Discontent because I adore the composition that she has and just the way that everything kind of goes into a focal point. And I selected two that were opposites, one that goes into a very dark focal point and one that goes into a very light focal point. We have Rage and Ruin, who also goes by Kit Rose, and I just really liked their composition, their lighting, their value. I wouldn't necessarily use those colors, and so I didn't include them in kind of the other categories, but really inspiring. And then that last image is actually by an artist that's already been on here, Chanelli, and I just like it. I like the way it looks, and so I want to remember that one for the future. I also added one from Le Walrus, who's a fan artist that has just amazing control over skin painting, and I always want to do more like her, so I included them as like a reference as well. I went back and grabbed the one that I'd actually deleted that I'd initially put on here in the very beginning, because it reminded me a lot of the kind of illustrations that I was looking at for the book illustrations, and I really think a lot of that is what is happening on this little inspiration board. It's a lot of just things that I would like to see and like to do, but that maybe don't necessarily fit what I'm going for at this moment. I hope this was helpful. I ended up including another version that I did initially before I went and did this version, and it might be something that you are more into or feels easier for you to do. And it's more of a kind of like, I feel like, common vision board where you just kind of stick the images in and then you have the authors listed off to the side, and it's very much a straight line and there's not a lot of composition or aesthetic to it, but it does what it needs to do. So if that's something that you would rather do instead, that is another way to do this if you don't want to make your own kind of composition or canvas like I did. I really hope that this was entertaining or at least informative in some way, or maybe that you found some new artists to follow. Let me know if you're going to do this or if you have done this before. And if you have any favorite artists, list them down below. I'm always looking for new active artists to enjoy and to follow. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!